Hi, this is Tom Workman, and this video tries to tackle some of the key concepts of the giant that is psychoanalysis and Sigmund Freud. So it's a pretty heavy theory, so we won't be going over a good portion of it, but we'll try to skip our way across some of the main concepts so people have a general understanding of psychoanalysis and the work of Sigmund Freud. One of the most important things to get out first, I guess, is that Freud gets a little bit of a bad rap. The theory in general, especially when we start talking about the stages, we won't go over in detail just for the sake of time. There's a lot of sex involved and a lot of penis and penis envy and all these things. So that tends to put people off a little bit. But what's really important to understand is that the work of Freud is really the groundwork for every counseling theory and psychological theory that we practice today to be able to help people. So please keep that in mind when we're going over this. And I hope that when you watch videos or read literature on other theories, that you start seeing some of the elements of Freud that are still at work today. Also, Freud is one of the first individuals to study early relationships with parents and the effect of parenting styles and the relationship with the parent that has on the individual over the lifespan. So that's really important because those are things that are heavily researched today within parenting styles. So keep that stuff in mind when we're going over some of these concepts. One of the first things that you think about when Freud comes up is the iceberg, right? So Freud focuses a lot, and psychoanalysis focuses on making things that are unconscious conscious for the individual, and that allows the individual to heal and get better. So as I'm sure many people watching this video are aware, that the iceberg is used to really illustrate this point, that a very small portion of the iceberg sticks out of the water, and the vast majority of the iceberg is underneath water and really isn't ever seen by the individual. So the top of that iceberg would really represent the conscious aspect, the things that I am aware of about myself, but the vast majority of me operates on a subconscious level. And that's important to understand because change and a lot of the techniques in the process that we'll be going over here in this video focuses on making the unconscious aspects of the person conscious. Also, the next thing that people recognize with Freud are the three parts in the structure of the personality. Right, the very first thing that develops within the individual is the id, and that's the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It operates on the pleasure principle. It wants things that feel good. Next would come the superego, and that would be my conscience, right? The part of me that feels guilt is a bit more reflective over things and even shame to an extent. And the ego operates in the middle of the two, and it operates on the reality principle. Right? It moderates the relationship between the ego, the id, and the superego, right? So it's the more rational aspect of self, the part of self that is really connected within reality, where the superego might be more of the judge. So when you're thinking of these three concepts and the structure of the personality, you could think of them as the devil on one shoulder as the id, the angel on the other as the superego, and then myself and connected to reality in the middle as the ego. So it's important to keep that in mind when we're talking about some of these things and types of anxiety that come up. So as we said before, one of the main goal of psychoanalysis is to bring things from the unconscious or the subconscious, preconscious into consciousness in order for the person to be able to move forward, right, to resolve issues that exist in the past. And that's vastly different than a lot of theories that we use today that are very much present driven and don't focus so much on talking about the past and focusing on the past in session, whereas psychoanalysis would be a little bit more, a lot more focused on the past. And these things from my unconscious, they come out. They come out through dreams, Freudian slips of the tongue, post-hypnotic suggestions, right? So as I go through life, right, and we've all had things that aren't operating on our very prefrontal cortex of our brain that we're thinking about, that we're talking to somebody, and something from my preconscious tends to slip out, right? So also within psychoanalysis, we look at 3 types of anxiety. The first would be reality anxiety, and this is anxiety that is connected to the things that exist in my life on a relatively concrete basis. Reality anxiety around being able to pay the bills, a project that's due, a healthy sense of anxiety. Next, we'll have moral anxiety, and that is more about failing to live up to my own morals and values, right? A sense of shame about myself, that I am not a good person. And the third type, and probably the most fun, is neurotic anxiety. And that anxiety is characterized by fear of losing control of my id, right? So it might be fear that you know, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I won't be able to control the part of me that just wants to do bad things and have fun, right? So I might go out on a bender, do cocaine all day and never come back from it. Fear of losing control of my id, right? Have you ever driven down the road and just had a fleeting thought, not that I ever have, but a fleeting thought of just veering into oncoming traffic? This would be the id, right? Doing something ridiculous, impulsive, and neurotic anxiety would focus on fearing to lose control or the ability to inhibit that. You know, that this anxiety within psychoanalysis really comes from repressed feelings, memories, and desires, and really comes out of the conflict of the 3 parts of the personality: the ego, the superego, and the id. And to be able to deal with this anxiety, we start to develop, which Freud probably is most famously known for, and is widely used today, of defense mechanisms, right? The most primitive one that we talk about is denial. And what's important to understand is that to a certain extent, defense mechanisms are absolutely healthy and normal and a part of living. That every one of us has certain defenses that we use to be able to alleviate anxiety or negative feelings that we are experiencing. The problem comes when those defense mechanisms that I rely on a daily basis, and so do you, start to interfere with my life and start to cause problems within my life. So you know, we'll take the easiest one first to talk about, the most well-known one probably, denial, right? Just the inability to accept certain things that are going on and just refusal to believe that certain things exist. So from clinical practice, it's very common in my field of addiction for parents to be in denial about their child's substance use. Now, why would a parent ever be in denial about their child's substance abuse? Could it be because thinking of the fact that my 16, 17, or even younger, 14, 13-year-old son or daughter is using heroin, and it's my fault, right? That overwhelming shame that could exist in the super ego of the individual, and that's tough to deal with. So if that parent would operate in denial on a consistent, or operate within that shame every second, every day, it would be overwhelming to them. So it's our natural response as beings to have these defense mechanisms to be able to get a break. Now, it becomes problematic with this parent if the denial is constant and consistent. Imagine it over the course of years, that the child continues to be enabled to continue drug use. The parent stays in stronger and stronger denial, and the child never gets help, and eventually something bad happens to the child dies, the parent can no longer use the defense mechanism of denial, because the evidence is just too strong. My child overdosed and died, right? So it prevented the individual, the parent, from taking action that could possibly help the child, and would be thought of widely within the field as good parenting, right? Holding the young individual accountable. So some of the other ones that come up, and there's tons of, not tons, but there's a good bit of them that you can take a look at, and I think they're all valuable. You know, even when we get to Gestalt, we'll look at how some of those are adopted from the work of Freud. Regression. I see this with a lot of individuals who I work with that have a history of trauma or sexual abuse of a child. That to cope with some of the feelings that they may be experiencing, they'll regress back to a previous stage of development, such as sucking their thumb would be one of the examples for regression. Bedwetting is another example of regression. Compensation, right? This is just what it sounds like, and this video won't really touch on psychodynamic work and the work of Jung, but it's very much built around the concept and defense of compensation, right? That I have a perceived weakness about myself, so therefore I do something to balance that out, to make myself look stronger. For example, why do guys drive big trucks, right? Obviously because they don't want a car, right? But to look at it that way, that we do certain things, and all of us do this to an extent, not necessarily drive a big truck from some unconscious inferiority or weakness that I perceive about myself, but to be able to feel stronger as a person because it's difficult to sit in that weakness. Reaction formation. Right? Suppose I have somebody in my life, and I really don't like them. They did something to me, and I want to do bad things to them. Instead of doing that thing that would be socially unacceptable, right? Such as hitting them in the face, for example. Reaction formation would be replacing that with the opposite, something more acceptable, like buying them an ice cream sundae, if you will. You know, finally, we will go over displacement. And I think that's a common one that I see with individuals. I had a bad day at work. I can't really take it out on my boss, right? Because there's significant consequences for me if I talk bad to my boss. So, like, I'm not stupid. So instead of doing that, I have to get that anger, that energy out of me, out of my id somehow. So to be able to do that, I have a bad day at work and I come home and I kick the dog, right? I displace that anger. So those are just some really brief descriptions of just a very small fraction of some of the defense mechanisms within psychoanalysis. We're not going to go over in this video because I can already see that the time's kind of getting out of hand, the stages, right? But if you take a look at some of the literature of Freud, it's really about the inability to resolve conflicts during a stage. The oral stage that deals around feeding, the anal stage, which is my will versus the will of others, right, that deals strongly around the behavior around potty training and toilet training and toddlerhood, right, that is widely the example that's used. Then the phallic stage, and that's where the Electra complex, penis envy, and the Oedipal complex exist. And then latency in the genital stage. But according to Freud, within those stages, an individual may get stuck and fixate in one of those stages because they did not resolve the conflict that came up in that stage that largely deals with their parents. So psychoanalysis operates under the assumption that that conflict operates in the unconscious of the individual. So it's my job as the psychotherapist to work with the individual to bring those things from deep inside the dark, deep crevice corners of my closet, out of my closet, and into my consciousness, right, where I can deal with them and resolve the conflicts that exist. And that is achieved through a variety of different techniques and ways of interacting with the client. What's relatively unique about psychoanalysis, as opposed to other theories, is that the counselor, the psychotherapist, the analyst really tries to capitalize on the existence of transference. Transference is the feelings that the client has towards the counselor, and countertransference would be the feelings that I have towards my client. So to be able to capitalize on transference, and I guess I can give an example first. With clients, I've reminded them of certain people in their life, right? Possibly their ex or their brother or somebody who they worked with and had a conflict. So upon meeting me, just based on the way I talk and based on the way I look, they didn't like me. Imagine that. I know that's hard to even fathom, not liking me based upon those things, but it happens, believe it or not. Right, so there was a level of transference there that needed to be dealt with. And me, in my personal style, I deal with that in a very overt way that's very much across the top of the table with the client. I'm working through some of these issues and resolving our conflicts. Where in psychoanalysis, me as a clinician, I would want to take a blank screen approach, right? So this was that stereotypical, I guess even stigma of what it means to be a counselor, where you have that couch over there in the corner and the client's laying with their head, they're facing away from me, and I'm sitting here so the client can never even see me, because I want to be able to facilitate that. I want to be a blank screen. I don't want to alter any projection that we didn't talk about of the client, which is a defense mechanism, onto me, right? I don't want to alter that. I want it to be as pure as possible, and then capitalize on that transference to get to some of the unconscious things that exist. And I hope that makes sense, and I hope I didn't unexplain it in my attempt to explain it, because I do that sometimes, right? So me as a clinician, as an analyst, I would absolutely want to be a blank screen that takes those projections of transference and works with them to get to the unconscious of the individual. Right, another important concept is that of resistance, right? Anything that works against the progress of therapy, right? So a client who's resistant to talk about certain things, resistant to participate in certain interventions, right? And as analyst, one of the techniques that I would do with that individual is analyze that resistance, right? To get to the root cause of that existence, to understand and help the individual bring to their consciousness the reasons for that that resistance. On top of that, I'm going to maintain an analytical framework, right? And that's a stylistic and procedural way of being. I'm going to be relatively anonymous right? So I can facilitate that transference, and we're going to have consistency of meetings, and the individual know what to expect every single time. Free association would be another technique. Tell me the first thing that comes to your mind, and then continue to talk as more words come to your mind to be able to work my way down to the unconscious of the individual. Interpretation is a large part of psychoanalysis, and I think you can infer as much that the word analysis is in the name of the theory, that we'll be interpreting certain things, such as dreams, right? You know, what certain objects mean within your dreams. And one of the jokes when psychoanalysis comes up is that a snake in your dream means a penis and whatnot. With me in my clinical work, I really don't get too much into dream work, other than helping the individual understand the feelings in their dreams are typically related to the feelings that they had in the previous day. But that's another topic for another time. With transference, again, we'll analyze it. We'll analyze the resistance. And those are some of the main concepts within the realm of psychoanalysis. This video won't do anything with psychodynamic work, but my recommendation, if you want something that, if you're going to talk about the work of Jung that might not be quite practical, but might be a little bit more practical and pragmatic compared to the work of Freud, I would really look into some psychodynamic work. So we'll talk about some of the limitations now. From a diversity perspective, Freud worked with upper middle class white people. So the theory wasn't really developed, and you can imagine that in the early 1900s, late 1800s, with a multicultural perspective in mind. And another limitation is directly related to that. So psychoanalysis is notorious for being expensive, and you can't get insurance to cover it. If anybody can tell me an insurance that'll cover it, that would be interesting. But so we're looking at years of therapy, several years, anywhere from, I guess, on the lower end of the spectrum, maybe 2 years to 10 years of therapy, of meeting 3 times a week. That frequency might change as we get into it, but this is a non-directive approach to therapy, so it's going to be fairly expensive. Yeah, and I'm an opinionated person, so it doesn't teach the individual much, right? A big thing that I do with clients, and a main focus of what I do with clients, is help teach coping skills. And psychoanalysis really doesn't do that. It's not active directive, and I'm a very active directive individual during the therapeutic process. Maybe not so much active, or maybe not so much directive, as I am very active. So it's important to understand that this very much allows the client to kind of do their own thing and provide interpretation and whatnot. And a lot of the research suggests that one of the main contributors to success during therapy is the therapeutic alliance between myself or any clinician and the clients who they work with. And obviously, if I'm taking a blank screen approach, it's going to significantly hinder my ability to have a relationship with my clients. So that's something really to consider, that it's not going to be focused on that. But all in all, this is a significant, very important theory within the development of psychology and mental health counseling, that we still use a lot of the concepts today.